but we'll muddle through. So with that, I'm going to turn on my screen share, and can you see my screen? Oh, but it's not. I think it's sharing, not. Okay, let me see if I can move the slides now. I can't. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the framework of regulations that you are asked to consider as part of your charge as an HRB member is set out in a number of different areas of laws. And we start with the federal laws. The U.S. Constitution applies to your work when it comes to the Fifth Amendment Takings Clause. You also deal with other federal laws like the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So those laws carry through into the work that we do together. State laws that control the work we do. Oregon revised statutes are the legislatively adopted laws, and those laws set out the procedures that you all follow when you hold hearings, and they provide additional special use protections related to, for example, how affordable or needed housing laws relate to historic preservation. That is a law. It's set forth in the Oregon revised statutes. There are also administrative rules that are adopted by agencies, like the Department of Land Conservation and Development adopts rules that then the city has to comply with. Goal 5, statewide land use goal 5, is the historic preservation goal that was adopted by administrative rule, and then there are administrative rules that promulgate goal 5 as it relates to historic resources, and the city has to implement them. Metro provides rules that the city has to comply with, most notably relating to the urban growth boundary and development of urban growth areas. That doesn't come up for you and historic review boards too often, but all of those rules, federal, state, and regional, are all incorporated into the city's municipal code and its comprehensive plan. And those are adopted by the city commission, and those are the rules that govern how we run our hearings and set forth the criteria by which we review land use applications. So this month marks the 50th anniversary of the adoption of Senate Bill 100, which is what created the Oregon Land Use Program. That's a picture of Tom McCall, made a very eloquent speech on the floor of the legislature arguing in favor of the statewide land use program that requires local governments to adopt urban growth, or cities to adopt urban growth boundaries, and instructed the Land Conservation and Development Commission to promulgate statewide land use goals, of which there are 18. There are 15 that apply to cities, fewer that apply in Oregon City, just because it doesn't have oceanfront land, it doesn't have farmland. So, but for your purposes, goal 5 is the livability goal that has to do with natural resources and historic preservation. So that is the goal that we are implementing when we implement the historic resources overlay. The long-range planning in Oregon City is done pursuant to the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan that was just recently adopted. And it has policies related to historic preservation that serve as the basis for some of your land use review decision making. And so that is the long range document from which land use decisions, land use regulations are based. And in addition to historic preservation, The comprehensive plan includes the concept plans and it includes utility master plans such as transportation, stormwater, water, and sanitary sewer. So all of sort of the city's long-range planning goals are set forth in that comprehensive plan that I believe some of you reviewed and weighed in on for its recent adoption. So the comprehensive plan is the long-range planning, and you all had opportunity recently to evaluate those policies. But your bread and butter work is what we call quasi-judicial development review. In other words, you sit as a court and evaluate a specific proposal for development against a set of criteria that are set forth in the code and the design guidelines. And in that quasi-judicial setting, the Historic Review Board is the final decision maker on whether an application is approved or denied, with a right to appeal to the City Commission. And the procedures that we follow are set forth in the code, but they are required by state law. So we don't have a lot of flexibility. We could not have a hearing. We could not have notice. The state law says that we have to do those things. And that is all part of assuring fairness in the system. So the quasi-judicial land use review categories that the city divide, it receives an application, it decides which type of review is required based on what the applicant is requesting. The first type 1 staff decisions are sort of over-the-counter land use reviews for pursuant to a building permit, where the city staff looks at the proposal and says, yes, you've got a 10-foot setback here, you've got a building that's 35 feet tall or less than 35 feet tall, that's the height limit. It is the use allowed in the zone. These are all things that are non-discretionary determinations that staff signs off on over the counter, and there is no right to appeal. Type 2 decisions are also staff decisions with a right to appeal to the City Commission. And type 2 decisions are land divisions, so subdivisions and partitions, and site plan review. So design review outside of the context of the historic overlay. So these are things that are not landmarked, not in historic districts, just design review. And in those cases, there's limited discretion, and there is notice given to neighbors, and neighbors are given 14 days to submit written comment, and then the community development director makes a decision, and then the appeal is to the City Commission. Those decisions you will never see. Where you will see most of your applications will be type 3 decisions. And this is a proposal for new construction in a historic district, an alteration to a historic landmark. Those are all type 3 decisions that have to come to the Planning Commission because they require exercise of policy judgment or discretion. And your job is to review the proposal to determine whether it complies with the criteria set forth in the code. City staff gives notice within 300 feet to property owners and invites them to participate in the public hearing by the Historic Review Board, and then there are appeal rights to the City Commission. There are also type 4 decisions, and is there an instance where the HRB would see a type 4 decision? These are annexation decisions, concept plan decisions, but I don't think the HRB would see a type 4 quasi-judicial decision. So your area is in the type 3 review. So the type 3 decision procedure that the city follows is again prescribed in local code, but also mostly in state law. It requires a pre-application meeting with the staff and often a neighborhood meeting. It requires that an application be filed and city staff has 30 days to deem it complete. And completeness is a term of art. That means staff has reviewed the application submittal requirements and checked the box that those items have been submitted. Staff does not weigh in on whether or not it satisfies the standards as part of the completeness review. It is just does it have the things that this code says that you need to submit? Does it have a traffic study if the code says that that's required? Not the quality or any evaluation of that study. Staff mails notice and post notice of hearing, and that notice has to identify the applicable approval criteria. It provides that state law says that staff has to provide a staff report 7 days that is available to the public 7 days in advance of the hearing. It requires that we have a public hearing, and that public hearing must include a series of mind-numbingly boring legal disclosures that instruct the public how we're going to run the hearing, including how the public can submit evidence. It instructs folks that their testimony needs to be directed to the applicable approval criteria. It points out that participants have to raise their issues before the Historic Review Board. Appeals to the City Commission are what we call on the record, which means you don't have an opportunity before the City Commission to submit new evidence. So your one opportunity to submit evidence that shows your application complies with the criteria, or for participants to show evidence that the materials are inadequate in some way, is before the Historic Review Board. So we tell the public that now is their chance to raise issues, or they waive them on appeal to the City Commission. And then if you wanted to appeal the decision onto the Land Use Board of Appeals, which is where decisions go after the City Commission, you have to have raised the issue before the local government. We tell people that they must raise any constitutional issues that they may have, and this has to do with the Fifth Amendment takings clause. So folks have to, if they believe that what the city is asking them to do is too much in terms of dedications or improvements, they have to raise those issues as part of the HRB review. And that the public has a right to an impartial tribunal. We'll talk a little bit about that. At the initial hearing, the first hearing on an application, any party has a right to a continuance, which means that the HRB does not deliberate and make a decision, but rather the hearing is continued to another hearing date where participants have an opportunity to submit additional evidence. The applicant has a right to rebuttal. And then the record closes and the HRB deliberates and makes a decision. Any questions? I can only see a couple of you. So if you have questions, please speak up, or you want to ask anything. Oh, clear as mud.
Oh, hey, Carrie, I just wanted to make one quick comment. Carrie shared these slides with the Planning Commission last night, but I want to reiterate that if you are a Historic Review Board in itself doesn't trigger a neighborhood association meeting, but oftentimes if it's in conjunction with like a commercial development, it may require, because they're doing commercial site plan design review. But if I am a single family a homeowner who has a historic home is going to make an addition to it, it's not required. And sometimes a pre-application conference is not required, but we always encourage people to talk to the neighborhood.
Thank you for clarifying that, Christina. So in the quasi-judicial context, each participant plays a role, plays a part in the review. And it's important for everybody to understand what roles every other person is tasked with pursuing. The applicant is charged with submitting an application that includes evidence establishing that the applicable approval standards are satisfied. It's important to remember it's the applicant that bears the burden of proof. That means they have to come forward with the drawings to show you that they can comply with the criteria. It is not the job of opponents or the HRB to produce that evidence. It is the applicant's job to produce evidence to show the criteria are satisfied. Planning and legal staff's primary job is to ensure the adequacy of the process and to comply with the laws that and the codes that are relevant. And so providing the notice that the law requires, ensuring that the findings are supportable. So our job is to make sure the process runs consistent with law and code. We are available to assist the HRB, answer questions. Our job is to know the laws and advise if there's some other rule that would be outside the HRB's purview. It's Christina and my job to bring that to the HRB's attention. And our job is also to know the record, and our job is to direct the HRB to where evidence is to assist in helping you make a decision. Neighborhood groups and others who participate in the hearing, they are entitled to notice, and they are entitled to an opportunity to participate. And that means submitting testimony in writing and submitting oral testimony consistent with the time limits or the requirements that the HRB sets. They are to raise concerns within the framework of the applicable approval criteria. And so things that are unrelated to the applicable approval criteria, like this applicant does lots of good works, or this applicant is a really good person, are not approval criteria. And so we try to help participants focus on the criteria, because I think that that's a difficult thing when folks are passionate to understand that you are sitting as a judge and only able to make a decision based on the criteria. And you as the HRB are charged with interpreting the criteria and applying them to the application at hand. And doing that requires a lot of review in advance, as many of you know, going through the pages and pages of applications and proposals and wading through staff reports where we've identified criteria and evaluating in the first instance whether you believe the evidence measures up. One of the things I like to tell all new members is that this is a tremendous opportunity and awesome responsibility that you all hold. And you have to be courageous and be willing to talk with your fellow board members about your concerns, because that's why you have been chosen. So don't be afraid to disagree with your fellow board members. In fact, we're hoping that you disagree and that you're able to, through consensus, reach a place that is consistent with the city's policies and codes. I mentioned earlier that participants have a right to an impartial tribunal. And excuse me, the law says that an impartial tribunal has 3 characteristics. The first element of making sure that the decision maker is impartial is that the decision has to be based on testimony and evidence that is part of the record. That means that any conversations or information that you get outside of the public hearing process needs to be included in the record so that participants have an opportunity to question you and understand that and respond to whatever perceptions you may have gotten from those contacts occurring outside of the public hearing. And so the traditional ex parte contact is someone who comes up to you in the grocery store and says, Commissioner Ferry, this proposal is outrageous. You shouldn't approve it. Who would ever think of designing an addition that looks like this? And wants to have a discussion with you in the grocery store about the pros and cons of a particular proposal. Those are ex parte contacts that have to be disclosed at the hearing. So the HRB hearing that follows after a conversation in the grocery store, the HRB chair will, as part of the opening of the hearing, will ask each board member if they've had any ex parte contacts since on this application. And that would include the board member disclosing those conversations. So if that happens, you write down the date that happened, and then at the next hearing you say, well, on January 15th, I was approached in the grocery store by Mr. Jones, and Mr. Jones wanted to have a conversation with me about this application. And if you have a conversation with that person, you need to disclose at the hearing what that conversation entailed. Or you can disclose on the record, Mr. Jones wanted to have a conversation and I encouraged him to come to the hearing on the 24th. And that is your disclosure. In addition to those ex parte contacts that happen one-on-one verbally, sometimes you will find you'll be reading the newspaper and there'll be an article about a proposal that's before you. You might see a blog post or a Nextdoor post about a proposal that is before you. And those are also ex parte contacts. And when you receive those, you need to pass, when you read those, even if you don't read them, you need to pass those along to city staff, and Christina or whoever's working on the application will put that article into the record so that the public has an opportunity to review it and comment on it. And so all of those media posts you need to pass along to staff, and we'll get them in the record. Site visits, you are encouraged to go do site visits in advance of the hearing, but we will, as part of this ex parte disclosure portion of the hearing, ask if anyone has made a site visit. And if you make a site visit and you observe things that influence your decision, you need to say what those are. I was there and I was surprised by how much taller the building is. I was surprised by the type of windows. I was surprised the door is not exactly where it's shown on the elevation. Any reflection you have from a site visit needs to be disclosed. Or if you have particular experience with an application, either with respect to its style or the district, or particular expertise in some way that is influencing your decision, you'd want to put that on the record so that folks would know and have an opportunity to respond. What we're trying to avoid is deliberation. So the record closes, all the testimony's been heard, and we start deliberation and one of the board members says, Well, I have worked with these types of windows before, and they are not going to work. They have this characteristic or that characteristic. And the problem with that is that's new information that the public and the applicant didn't get an opportunity to respond to. So what we're trying to do is vet those while the record is open so that folks have an opportunity to comment. Any questions about ex parte contacts or? Okay. The second.
Carrie, sounds like Dave has a question.
Okay.
Dave, did you want?
Board Member Green.
Yeah, it sounds like based on that description, I'm a retired general contractor, so probably in a good number of the cases, my input or my takeaways will be reflected. So I'm guessing it may just be best each time that's asked that I just disclose I'm a retired general contractor, and that may influence my perspective. Is that reasonable or necessary?
Well, I think you're gonna have to experiment with this a little bit, but I would say during the disclosures that you're a retired general contractor, and I would leave it at that. But if you find as you're reviewing these that applications that come before you that your general contractor expertise is influencing your decision beyond what you're seeing in the evidence, and I suspect that will happen in a particular way because of your expertise as a general contractor. And so I would encourage you to sort of just keep that in mind, and we can talk about that if you see a proposal that they're using a roof that won't work, or a system, a window system that won't work. I would encourage you to reach out to Christina or to Aquila in advance of the hearing, and we can sort of talk through whether or not your experience is one of those that you can disclose and then continue on, or if it is so strongly held personal to you that it makes sense for you to step down because you can't be impartial.
Okay.
And that's the sort of ex parte contacts. All of this evidence part are materials you can disclose, and once you disclose them, you say, but I am going to make a decision based on the criteria and the evidence that's before me. But there may be cases where you can't, either because of your professional experience or because you absolutely cannot stand that applicant. There is nothing that person could do that would make you vote for the project because you can't stand that person. That is called actual bias, and we all have them. I mean, that there are applications. I'm a trained preservationist, and there are things that I would have a difficult time making a decision based on the criteria because those are vinyl windows, or I don't know, but you have to everybody's got those lines. And so the reason why we have a number of you is that we can spare a couple if you have bias. We want you to feel free to approach Christina or to me or to Aquila, and you don't have to participate, and that is perfectly fine. And we understand. So actual bias, just so you know, the bar for the courts to find actual bias is very, very high. You all are participants in the Historic Review Board. Of course you care about preservation. You wouldn't do it if you didn't. right? And you're also members of communities of people who own historic homes, commercial buildings. So it is not the case that you are expected to be free of any opinions. You are on this board because you have opinions. But there are some opinions that make it impossible for us to consider the criteria, and that's actual bias. The third type of conflict that requires adjustment due to partiality has to do with conflict of interest. And in a conflict of interest occurs if you or a member of your family stand to gain financially or lose financially from an outcome. So Board Member Green, if you were a contractor working on a project that was before the HRB, where you would make money one way or the other, depending on whether the application was approved, that would be an actual conflict of interest that you could not participate in. So in the cases of conflict of interest, again, if there's concern, if you or a member of your family might suffer a financial benefit or detriment as a result, you want to reach out to one of us and we can help decide if it's an actual conflict of interest, which would require you to step down, or a potential conflict of interest that could be disclosed and you can go ahead and participate. Okay, so in addition to unbiased decision or impartial decision maker, we are, as city officials, obligated to comply with the public meetings and public records requirements. So public meeting occurs anytime a majority or a quorum of you get together and talk about a decision that is before the HRB. And that can occur at a party, it can occur on the street, it can occur on a conference call, and it can occur by email if you all were to, it's called a serial meeting, where Commissioner or Board Member Green emails Board Member Powell, who then emails Board Member Ferry, who then emails Board Member Edgar, who then emails Board Member Stobie. Even if you each individually pass along an email, that can be a public meeting. And public meetings have to be open to the public. They have to have notice and minutes. And there are enforcement provisions that are carried forward if if HRB members were to engage in a public meeting without complying with the public meetings laws. So we want to be careful about that. So at your next all-night HRB cocktail party or dance-a-thon, karaoke, don't talk about city business. Keep it to sharing recipes and knitting patterns. All right, and public records. Written materials that the city gets and emails that you get from constituents are all public records if they're related to city business. And that is why, if you don't yet, you will have a Oregon City email account. And as strenuously as I can, please keep city business separate from your personal business. If somebody were to file a public records request asking for materials related to an application and you have mixed emails, city would have to go through your personal email account to locate your business related emails. So try to just keep them separate. Use your Oregon City account for city business and use your personal account for personal business. There is a recent case out of West Lynn where a city councilor was writing notes during a city council meeting, and a constituents filed a public records request asking for copies of those notes. And the city argued that the city councilor was was writing those notes not in her capacity as the city, but just taking notes. And what the Oregon Court of Appeals said is that that person sitting at the meeting was acting as the city, as a city official, and that those notes were public records. So I'm telling you this because I often find myself making a grocery list sometimes, those could be public records. If you text during a meeting, those could be public records if someone were to ask. So be sensitive during the time of a public meeting with your activities, because written materials, electronic or on paper, could be public records. So be ready to share those grocery lists if the time comes. So just don't text. I think about it when I'm texting the babysitter during a meeting sometime, that I'm sort of like, well, when I'm texting the babysitter, I'm going to be an hour later than I thought. I think if that gets disclosed, that'll be okay, but other than that, try to keep the text to a minimum. Those are sort of the constraints that the HRB is working under when it is sitting as a judge making a decision on an application to determine whether it complies with whether an application complies with the criteria. But the most important part of your job is the deliberation, where you and your fellow board members will decide whether the applicant has met its burden to show that the standards are satisfied. And that requires interpreting the applicable approval criteria. These criteria are discretionary, right? They are compatibility, right? Impacts the significance of the district. That requires an interpretation of what is the significance of the district. What does compatible mean? What are we evaluating compatibility against? That is all interpretation of criteria, and that's why you all make the big money. And so that is a primary principle of your deliberation. All decisions have to be supported by adequate findings. Adequate findings means an explanation of how you interpret the criteria, what evidence you find persuasive, and explains how that evidence meets the criteria. And the staff report provides the initial series of findings. It's a recommended set of findings, but that's all it is, a recommendation. You are not bound by those findings. In fact, if you want to alter those findings as part of your decision, that's what you are charged with doing. So if you believe that there's a different explanation or different evidence that you believe is persuasive, we have an obligation to assist you in writing it down so that it can be explained, so that it can be reviewed by the City Commission on Appeal and ultimately to the Land Use Board of Appeals if it goes that far. Decisions have to be based on substantial evidence, and the substantial evidence test is whether there is evidence in the record that a reasonable person would believe to be true. So, and I don't know who a reasonable person is these days, but that's the standard. And so, in the case of conflicting evidence, the HRB gets to decide which evidence is the most reliable. And that is, so evaluating the credibility and veracity of the evidence is part of your charge. And then sometimes when an applicant hasn't proposed something that satisfies the standard, but the HRB identifies additional changes to the proposal that would satisfy the standard, we include in the decision conditions of approval. And those are sort of additional things the applicant must do in order to proceed with their project. I talked a little bit about the interpreting discretionary criteria. I was looking at the new comprehensive plan today, and I think the comprehensive plan policy that is most relevant to type 3 reviews would be encourage property owners to preserve historic structures in a state as close to their original construction as possible, while allowing the structure to be used in an economically viable manner. So there's a lot of discretion there, as you can imagine, and it's going to be up to you to decide whether or not a particular proposal measures up to that plan policy in cases where the comprehensive plan is a criteria. I talked a little bit about HRB having the authority to resolve conflicts with evidence and weighing evidence in the first instance, and that the LUBA standard of review is the reasonable person standard. This is my last slide, and I just offer it as sort of reflections on what I think makes for effective participation. Try to avoid ex parte contacts or evidence. Your life will be easier if you try to. There will be cases when you can't, and we will work with you to disclose those contacts and talk about making a decision based on the evidence in the record. Be attentive and prepared. Don't be afraid to ask questions of all the parties in order to understand. Focus on the issues and don't make assumptions about what you hear. Try to ask open-ended questions and start with a summary or paraphrase of what you hear in order to sort of frame the question so that you're able to get the most complete answer. Don't make your mind up beforehand, and don't be afraid to disagree. So those are just some suggestions. I'm sure all of you have your own sort of best practices, and I'd be interested in hearing them either by email or another time. But at this point, I'd like to take the last 5 or so minutes that we have for any questions, comments, criticisms, jokes.
Hey, Carrie, can you unshare your screen?
Yes, I can.
Thanks.
Board Member Green.
Back to the topic of continuance. Who requests continuance? Does the applicant, do people, just the general public, board members? Who?
So the law says that anyone can ask for a continuance. So that means the applicant or anybody who attends the public hearing and makes the request during the hearing, or somebody who submits testimony in advance. The HRB can certainly decide that they're not ready to make a decision and decide to pursue a continuance, but that right to a continuance is for participants in the public hearing.
And that's just for the first hearing. After that,
for the initial hearing, not for the ones that come after that.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that continuance question, after that initial continuance, is if somebody requests it and it's granted, the board has, well, maybe this is a question. I was going to make a comment, but I'll turn it into a question for Carrie. I believe the board has a discretion whether they want to grant the continuance or not.
At the initial hearing, it has to be granted. They don't have the discretion not to grant it. But after the initial hearing, so at the second hearing, the continued hearing, the board does not have to grant a continuance request that is made.
And then a follow-up on that, what does that do to the 120-day time period? Does that automatically extend it, or does that have to fall within that time period?
It has to fall within that time period unless the applicant extends the deadline.
Yeah.
That 120-day period is always in the control of the applicant entirely.
Okay.
Good question.
I would love to just make one comment to Dave. Those of us that have rebuilt or done construction like you have done, I have done, one of the reasons why we're here is because we've gone through a lot of the same process. We've thought about it, we've researched it, and it's I don't believe that the fact that I have gone through a lot of education on historic windows precludes me from making a ruling on historic windows. I'm just trying to enlighten myself along the way. And I know you have too. So we're all trying our best.
I would like to add one more comment, and that is the reason why these public meetings don't have the chat feature in the Zoom is because of like record preservation and not being able to kind of respond appropriately, and or for you all to be able to just have your discussion virtually. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. A lot of times Zoom meetings have that ability to chat, but it's purposely disabled for some of those reasons.
Okay, well, I really appreciate your attention. I hope those of you who've heard me before either were reminded of something or learned something. I am, and it wasn't too repetitive, I am always available to answer questions. If you direct them to Christina or to Aquila, they know how to find me and loop me in. And I've had conversations with some of you on occasion when we needed to, and I look forward to working with you this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, Sabrina, you're on mute.
Of course I am. Yeah, thank you so much. And so that concludes our work session. And then we'll meet back for our regular meeting at 7.
Yep, same Zoom link.
All right, sounds good.